Okay, so you've come to us with a fascinating piece of documentation.
It is quite a hefty one.
It is. It's the Somatic PCS7 OS Process Control Operating Instructions. And wow, that's a mouthful. But what we're going to try to do today in this deep dive is extract the crucial knowledge from this manual.
The goal is to make you the expert
Exactly.
in as short a time as possible.
And specifically the manual that you've been provided by Portal Mi Empresa para Chinosa, so we can get a clear understanding of how to use this system quickly and efficiently.
Yeah, this manual is going to be your guide to using the PCS7 OS, which stands for Operator System, of course. And it's all about how to use this system when it's in process mode. So think about those central control interfaces that you see in a modern industrial facility. This is going to tell you all about it.
So our goal in this deep dive is to understand how an operator interacts with and monitors an industrial process using this PCS7 OS. And we really want to get a sense of, if you're sitting down at a workstation, what are you actually seeing? What are you doing?
And this manual walks through a lot of the key areas that you need to know. We're going to be focusing on how the process is visually represented. How do you analyze trends in the data? How are alarms and messages managed? And how can you go back and access reports and other historical information?
Okay, so let's start with the basics. When we talk about the PCS7 OS in process mode, what are its core functions? What are the fundamental things that it allows an operator to do?
Really, at its heart, it's all about giving the operator the ability to control and monitor the industrial process.
Okay.
And the manual breaks it down into 5 key areas. There's the graphics system. This is how you visually see what's happening at the plant. It's the process diagrams. It's the trend charts. Any active alerts. It's really how you interact visually with the system.
So it's not just looking at data. It's like a dynamic visual representation.
Exactly. It's very visual.
Okay.
Then there's the trend system. And the trend system is all about looking at the data over time. It helps you to spot patterns, predict any potential problems that might be coming.
So if something is trending outside of its normal parameters, that's where you'd see it.
That's right. You'd be able to spot it there. Then there's the message system. The message system is basically your diagnostic center. It handles all the alarms, all the notifications that the system might generate.
Okay.
And then there's the report system, which, as you might expect, lets you generate all the documentation about the process. And then finally, there's the archive system. This is where all the historical data is stored, so you can go back and review anything that's happened in the past.
So these 5 systems are kind of working together to give you a comprehensive view and control over what's happening.
That's right.
Okay. Now imagine you're sitting down at a workstation and you've got this PCS7 OS running. What does that user interface actually look like?
Okay, so first of all, you're going to see this overview area. And this gives you a constant, high-level view of the entire plant status. It will often have buttons to quickly navigate to different sections, and probably most crucially, it's going to display the most critical active message, so you immediately know if there's a problem that needs your attention.
That makes a lot of sense. That's like your situational awareness display.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And then the main part of the display is called the work area, and that's where you're going to see the detailed process graphics, trend displays, message lists, any of the specific information you need to work with.
Okay.
Below that, or maybe off to the side, you're going to find your button sets.
Okay.
The manual actually refers to these as button set 1 and button set 2.
Got it.
And they're kind of like toolbars.
Yeah.
That give you quick access to different functions within the OS.
Shortcuts.
Exactly. And there's a really cool feature here. If you hover over the buttons with your mouse, a tooltip pops up that explains what that button does. So it's a great learning tool.
Oh, that's great. So if you're new to the system, it kind of helps you get up to speed.
Exactly. And then finally, you'll see the key area. And that's where you'll find dedicated buttons for direct operator control functions.
Okay, so we have the overview for the big picture, the work area to see the details, and then the button sets to take action.
That's right.
Now, the manual also mentions something called system operator inputs. What are those?
So these are inputs that you make to manage how you're interacting with the OS itself.
Okay.
Rather than controlling any of the equipment directly.
Right, so it's not changing the process, it's changing how you are using the system.
That's right. And one of the most fundamental ones is logging on and off.
Right.
There are different ways to do this. You can use a password, smart card, even biometric authentication, if it's set up for that. And the manual mentions a system login dialog or a somatic login service dialog. It all depends on how it's configured. And it also stresses the importance of logging off when you're finished, for obvious security reasons.
Oh, absolutely crucial.
Yeah. Another system input would be exiting process mode altogether.
Yeah.
And to do that, you would use a button in button set 2.
Okay.
And then there's also those basic interface actions, like bringing up those tooltips we talked about.
Right.
Bringing up information about a process graphic. There's even a hard copy function, which basically takes a snapshot of your screen, and you can send that to a printer.
So if you need to print out what you're seeing to show somebody or to keep a record of it.
Exactly. And acknowledging messages is also considered a system input,
Okay.
even though it does interact with the message system. And the manual notes that the display element used for acknowledgement can actually have 2 different operating modes.
Interesting.
And then there are some administrative functions, like accessing the user administrator window to manage user permissions, displaying system configuration information. And then if it's installed, you can open specialized control centers like the BCCH control center or the RED control center. You can even view SFC charts in process mode. That's a sequential function chart. But you can only monitor it. You can't actually make any changes to it. And then there are a couple other things. Changing the user interface language, viewing print jobs through the reports function. Those are all considered system-level inputs as well.
So it's really a whole range of functions that allow you to kind of manage how you're accessing and working with the system.
That's right.
Okay, so let's talk about the graphic system, which is probably the most used part of the system for an operator. What are some of the ways that operators use that to actually interact with the industrial process based on this manual?
Well, the manual explains that operator interaction happens in a few different areas.
Yeah.
Let's start with the overview area.
Okay.
We talked about changing the plant area you're viewing by clicking on those area selection buttons. There's also the picture tree navigator, which lets you browse through different process graphics in a hierarchical way.
Okay.
And then you can acknowledge messages. You can monitor the status using the group displays, which is basically a summarized view of a lot of components. And you can get detailed information about a message using the extended message line.
So it's a dynamic area. It's not just like a static display. You can actually interact with it to drill down into different things.
Exactly.
Okay. What about the button area? What kinds of things can you do there?
Well, in the button area, you can access the message system.
Okay.
Which is where you see a full list of all the incoming alarms and events. You can also lock and unlock messages, which is really helpful during maintenance or commissioning phases because it prevents you from getting a flood of notifications that might not be relevant at that time. You can also select pictures directly. There's buttons for previous picture, store picture, recall picture, and then there's also a picture selection via process tag, so you can actually jump directly to a specific graphic by entering the ID tag.
Okay. So that's all navigation and kind of general system interaction. What about actually controlling the industrial process? How does that work?
That primarily happens in the process pictures themselves.
Okay.
And there's 2 main things that you'll see there.
What?
Block icons and faceplates. Block icons. Think of these as interactive diagrams of the equipment.
Okay.
So it could be a pump, a valve, a controller.
Right.
But they display real-time information. They'll show the tag name, the set point, the actual measured value, any status indicators, the mode it's in. And the manual points out that they use color coding. So, for example, a block icon might turn cyan when its faceplate is open. So you know that you're actively controlling that component.
That's a good visual cue. Okay, and the faceplates are those where you actually make the changes?
That's right. Faceplates are standardized windows for control and display, and you typically open them by clicking on the associated block icon.
Okay.
And within a faceplate, you can do things like acknowledge messages that are specific to that piece of equipment.
Okay.
You can lock or unlock messages. There's actually a messages view within the faceplate. You can switch between different views. You can see different aspects of the component. There's even a loop display that'll open all the views at the same time.
So you can see everything about that particular component.
That's right.
Okay, now what kind of control actions can you actually make through these faceplates?
Well, the manual provides an overview of the different types of inputs.
Okay.
For digital values, like if you're tuning a motor on or off, you'll see dedicated buttons or switches within the faceplate. For analog values, like setting a temperature or a flow rate, you might have a few options.
Okay.
You might be able to type in a value. There might be a scroll bar. You might see what they call direct operation buttons, so you can change the value in increments.
Got it.
And the manual notes that sometimes with those direct operation buttons, the change happens immediately. You don't have to hit an execute button or anything like that.
So different ways to interact based on what you're actually trying to adjust.
That's right.
Okay, let's talk about the trend system now. Why is it so important to see historical data, and how do operators use the trend system based on this manual?
Well, the trend system really helps you to understand how the process has been behaving over time,
Right,
so you can see if anything's out of the ordinary.
right.
And typically, you would access this via a button in Button Set 1,
Okay.
which might be labeled Load Configured Trend Groups.
So you can see the historical behavior of whatever parameters you're interested in.
That's right. And when you're looking at the trends, you might be looking at what are called archives tags, which is historical data,
Okay,
or you might be looking at online tags, which is real-time data.
got it.
And the system pulls in information about the tags so that it can scale the charts properly. You can zoom in and out. You can shift the time period forward and backward.
So you can really manipulate the display to see what you need to see.
Exactly.
Now, what if you find a particular view that's really informative? Can you save it so you can go back to it later?
You can work with what they call stored trend groups,
Okay.
and you can manage these using the Trends Online dialog.
Okay.
You can recall configurations you've saved, you can delete them, you can rename them, and the manual also explains how to create new trend groups, whether you want to look at historical data, real-time data, or even combine the two.
So you can look at both historical and real time at the same time.
You can, yeah.
Okay, now let's move on to the message system. What does that do, and how does it keep operators informed?
The message system is really all about process diagnostics.
Mhm.
And it uses message lists to display any alarms or events that occur within the system.
Okay.
And the messages are shown in what they call message lines. And these lines are organized into message blocks.
Okay.
And these blocks contain information about the event. So you'll see the date and time.
Right.
You'll see the priority level, the source of the message,
Mm-hmm.
a description of what happened, the status, is it a new alarm or has it been acknowledged?
Mm-hmm.
And then the type of message it is. And all of these messages are displayed in chronological order.
So you have a time-stamped record of everything that's going on.
That's right.
Okay. Now, are there different types of message lists?
Yes, there are different message lists for different purposes within PCS 7, and you can view them using the message system button set.
Mm-hmm.
There's a toolbar that helps you manipulate the lists,
Mm-hmm.
and the manual goes into some detail about how the messages and the system actually behave.
Okay.
It explains the different states that a message can be in: incoming, acknowledged, exited. And it also mentions that older unacknowledged messages might be automatically acknowledged by the system in some cases, but you can still see the history of that message.
Okay.
And importantly, the highest priority unacknowledged message is always shown in the overview area.
So it doesn't get lost.
Exactly.
Okay. Now, what kinds of things can an operator actually do within these message lists?
Well, there's the standard actions, like acknowledging messages. You can acknowledge individual messages. You can acknowledge all the ones you can see. You can get detailed information about a message. And if a message is related to a piece of equipment, you can actually jump right to its faceplate
Oh,
or even the associated SFC chart.
okay.
And you can show and hide messages, and you can sort the list based on different criteria.
Now, what if you're only interested in seeing a particular type of message? Like you only care about the high priority alarms or something. Can you
Right.
filter the list?
You can. The system has really powerful filtering capabilities.
Okay.
You can create filters based on all sorts of criteria using the selection dialog box.
Mm-hmm.
So you could filter by priority level or by area of the plant. You can even filter by message type.
Right.
You can save these filters. You can recall them. There's even an example in the manual showing how to create a filter. You can also hide individual messages.
Uh-huh.
There's actually 2 ways to do that.
Okay.
And the system keeps track of all the hidden messages. And you can also sort the list alphabetically based on different columns.
Okay. So really a lot of ways to kind of slice and dice the information to see what you need to see.
Exactly.
So we've covered graphics, trends, messages. What about reports and archives?
Well, the report system is really just mentioned briefly in the manual. It's for generating process documentation.
Mm-hmm.
The manual doesn't go into a lot of detail about the specifics, but it's there if you need to create reports.
Okay.
The archive system, on the other hand, that's a really important one
Okay.
because that's where all the historical data is stored,
Mm-hmm.
process values, messages, reports, all that. And the manual points out that you can access this data from a lot of different places: operator stations, servers, web clients. You can even get to it on a remote PC.
Wow.
And you can also export the data if you need to analyze it using a different tool.
So what kind of data is actually being archived in the system?
Well, there's tag logging fast for
Ah.
process values that need to be recorded at high frequency.
Okay.
There's tag logging slow for values that change more slowly.
Mm-hmm.
There's alarm logging, which stores all the messages and alarms,
Okay.
part out for the OS logs, and then separate archives for BATCH reports if the system has that functionality.
Now, how do you actually go about viewing this historical data?
Well, for trends, you can select a specific time period that you're interested in,
Okay.
and the system will go and grab the data from the archive and display it as a trend graph.
Yeah.
You can also see historical message lists, same kind of deal. You choose a time range, and it'll show you the messages from that period. The manual also mentions the Storage Plus Web Viewer, which is a web-based tool for displaying and exporting the data. You can even view archives on a remote PC using Internet Explorer, and you can manage the archive time periods using the Storage Plus Administration Console.
Okay, so you can really drill down and see all the history of what's happened in the plant.
That's right.
Now, there's also a section in this manual on the PCS-7 maintenance station. What is that?
So the maintenance station is basically a special operator station that has a lot of features specifically for diagnostics and maintenance.
Okay.
And it'll often have things like asset management built into it as well.
Got it.
And the purpose is to really provide a single place where you can see the health of all the components in the system. And it gives you the ability to configure parameters, to log activities, to generate diagnostic screens.
So it's more about the upkeep and troubleshooting of the system itself.
Right. And it has its own diagnostics area with a special group display.
Okay.
And the diagnostic screens are structured in a hierarchy.
Okay.
You start with an overview, and then you can drill down to see more detail.
Okay.
There's also a special icon called the Maintenance Group Display that gives you a quick overview of the status of the system.
Got it.
And operators can then navigate through these screens to find the source of a problem.
But how do you actually interact with these screens?
Well, you can open the diagnostics overview.
Okay.
You can use the group displays to get to specific components. You can open diagnostic faceplates.
Okay.
You can acknowledge and correct messages. And you can even export identification data. And there are a bunch of icons that you'll see in the block icons and faceplates that tell you about the status of the equipment,
Got it.
whether it's in local operation or simulation or out of service, if there's any maintenance requests.
Right.
And there's even a good indicator and an unknown indicator.
Mm-hmm.
And there are different message classes that you might see. Process control error, maintenance desired, maintenance requested, things like that.
Okay.
And each of those will have its own priority and acknowledgement requirements.
Mm-hmm.
And the manual shows how the status of redundant components is reflected in the display.
Interesting. So a lot of thought has gone into making all of this really clear and easy to understand for the operator.
That's right.
Now, what kind of information can you find in the diagnostic faceplates?
Well, there are a few different views.
Okay.
There's identification,
Right.
which just gives you basic information.
Right.
Maintenance,
Uh-huh.
messages,
Right.
monitoring,
Okay.
communication,
Got it.
parameters,
Uh-huh.
and then change report.
So you can really see everything about what's going on.
And there's also a CPU function block faceplate that gives you information about CPU utilization, OS blocks, and emergency operating mode parameters. And the manual also highlights the global asset block, which provides user-specific monitoring and diagnostics.
Now, the last section of the manual from Portal Mi Empresa Parasinosa talks about creating a plant-specific process control manual. Why is that important?
Well, even though the standard operating instructions are very comprehensive, every plant is a little bit different.
Right.
They have their own configuration,
Right, their own equipment.
different procedures.
Absolutely.
So it's helpful to have a manual that's tailored to this specific plant.
Makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
How do they suggest going about doing that?
Well, they say you start by accessing the PCS-7 toolset DVD.
Okay.
You find the standard instructions document, and then you save a copy of it under a new name.
Right.
And then you can edit that copy to include all the specifics of your plant.
So you can customize it to your needs. Okay, so after going through this manual provided to us by Portal Mi Empresa Parasinosa, it's clear that this PCS-7OS is really a sophisticated system designed to give operators a lot of control and visibility.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to put it. You can really see everything from high-level stuff down to the tiniest details.
You know, one thing that really stood out to me was how well integrated all these different systems are. You know, you can go from an alarm, right, to the process graphic and even to a diagnostic faceplate for a specific piece of equipment.
It's a really well-designed system. It's really meant to give the operator all the information they need in a very efficient way.
Absolutely. So for you, the listener, I encourage you to dive into your manual and explore the sections that are most relevant to what you do. This deep dive has given you a broad overview, but the manual has a ton of specific instructions that you can use.
And here's a final thought to consider. The fact that this system is so comprehensive and so detailed really shows how complex and critical these industrial processes are. What does that mean for the training of the people who operate and maintain these systems? It's a really important question to think about. You need both well-designed systems and highly skilled personnel to make sure everything runs smoothly.
Really does make you appreciate the level of expertise that's required to keep these plants running.
It does.
All right, well, that's all the time we have for today. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the PCS 7 OS. We'll see you next time.
See you next time.